Service College and a diploma in Future Global Leadership Development from the University of the Virgin Islands. Please help me welcome our host for today, Dr. Arlene T. Penn.
Okay, good morning to everyone. We are in the middle of a very special and exciting time here as we celebrate the Financial Services Week. This year is a special one because it is themed around the financial services regulator, that is Dr. Robert Mathavius, OBE, and in his capacity as the Financial Services Commission for many, many years. Now, this year's Financial Services Week, it started on the 20th of November under the theme Celebrating Our Financial Services Ecosystem Through Effective Regulation, and it will culminate on November 25th. To make this event successful, I am pleased to serve as your moderator for this special edition of the Breakfast Forum, and our topic this morning would be the gatekeepers of financial services. We have a wonderful panel here today, two gentlemen who are actually the head of BVI regulatory arms, Mr. Errol George, Director of the Financial Investigation Agency, and Mr. Kenneth Baker, who is the CEO and Managing Director of the Financial Services Commission. Let us welcome them. So our objective here today is just to give you an opportunity to understand through the regulatory lens, the role of BVI Financial Services. I welcome you both to this program, and we are out for a very, very good conversation. Now, Ms. Donovan would have spoken a lot about who I am, but it's not about me, it's more about you. So let us start there. Perhaps you, Errol, you can give us a clear understanding of who you are, what your role is, and how you came to be in the position where you are.
Good morning. Thanks, Dr. Penn. And it's an opportunity. It's a good opportunity to be here representing the Financial Investigation Agency on this occasion. Like you said, my name is Errol George. I'm the director of the Financial Investigation Agency, which is the financial intelligence unit of the British Virgin Islands. My former life, I was a police officer. I joined the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force in 1993, and to be quite honest, I had no idea at the time that I would have ended up being the director of the Financial Investigation Agency. At that time, my goal was to become the Commissioner of Police. Obviously, things happened, and that sort of went in another direction. Hence the reason why I'm here as the Financial Investigation Agency's director.
Let me ask you this though, what are some of the specific things you think you would have done as a police officer that would have allowed you then to catapult into Financial Investigation Agency?
Yeah, so it was in the late 1990s. I remember I was in the police major crimes unit at the time, and the opportunity arose where one day my then supervisor approached me and he said, okay, would you like the opportunity to work to be transferred to the Financial Investigation Unit of the police? So I thought about it and I said, okay, you know what is there to lose? Perhaps there's an opportunity there. So I took it. At the time, the head of the Financial Investigation Unit was Mr. Graham Smith, who was actually seconded from one of the police forces in the UK. And I remember the first conversation I had with Mr. Smith when I joined the Financial Investigation Unit. He said, well, Errol, I'm passing through. There'll be a time when my tenure here will end, and I'm looking for someone who will succeed me as head of the Financial Investigation Unit. But then things didn't stop there. What happened is that I think about 3 years later, during that time, of course, it was discussion about separating the Financial Investigations Unit from the police and creating a statutory body to basically take on the role that the Financial Investigation Unit was doing at the time, which was, specifically to receiving suspicious activity reports, investigating financial crimes, so to speak. So in 2003, when the law was passed that to the Financial Investigation Agency, of course, I was asked to come over and be a part of the agency.
Okay, so in other words, you were actually preparing, but you didn't know what you were preparing for, you see? So
Exactly.
everything, you always connect the dots.
Right, absolutely.
All right, so Ken, tell me about you, who you are, how you got to where you are, and the role that you play at the Financial Services Commission.
Okay, thanks, Arlene. So I would have started my career in banking, and then in 2000, I joined the Financial Services Department. And then about in 2002, the Financial Services Commission was established, and I was appointed as the Director of Banking and Fiduciary Services. In 2004, I was appointed as the Deputy Managing Director for Regulation, and then of course, in February of this year, I assumed the role as Managing Director, CEO, on the retirement of Dr. Matthias OBE. And so I've had private practice. I worked in private practice for some time, which helped me to transition into the sphere of regulation.
Okay, so what are some of the classes you think you would have taken in your primary years or secondary years or even in your tertiary education that would have allowed you to be where you are today? Because sometimes we don't really connect the dots, but I think it's important because there are some young people who may be interested in getting into the field. What are some of the things that you believe you would have taken to get to where you are?
Well, my degree is in international business, so
Okay.
I was taking courses like economics, accounting, financial management, business management, and things like that. So those courses would have been, you study them and you don't realize you don't connect the dots, as you would say. And then later on, as you begin to work in the field, you realize that some of those same topics that you study, they come back. And sometimes you go back and you dig up the book and look through, you see an equation that you remember that has some use for it, and you apply it and it works. So we don't always appreciate the courses that we take, that there's a relevance to it. And we don't always think that there's a practical application to it until you get into the work environment. And then you realize those theories can actually work in practice.
Okay, so then it takes me to this. Sometimes, yes, there are gen eds, and we do not like to take the general education because we want to get directly into our programs. But as you say, when you're actually doing the work, then you recognize the importance
Right.
of the science or the English and all the subjects and how it relates to the one area that you're really interested in. So that it's good that you've been able to
Right.
explain that, because we want the young people to get involved in the industry as well, so that it continues to evolve and evolve over and over.
Yeah, the courses you learn in whether college or university helps you to build a foundation, but your actual learning starts on the job. It's really on the job is where you develop in your field of specialization. The theoretical teaching from the college is really the foundation to get you into the practical aspect.
Okay, so let's get into the meat, because we are here to talk about you being the gatekeepers of
Right.
financial services. And Errol, I'll start with you first in terms of what would you say is the function and the responsibility of the Financial Investigation Agency as it relates to being the gatekeepers of financial services?
I think first and foremost, the role and function of the Financial Investigation Agency is to help protect the reputation of the territory's financial services sector. Now, to be more specific in terms of what we do at the agency, I mentioned earlier that the agency is the Financial Intelligence Unit, but it actually makes up two components. It has the Financial Intelligence Unit, for example, which receive, analyze, and investigate the suspicious activity reports that are filed by the banks and the trust and company service providers, insurance companies, and other entities that are required to report under the financial services legislation, the various pieces of legislation. But the other arm of what we do is we have a supervisory component. That supervisory component is responsible for the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing supervision of what we refer to as designated non-financial businesses and professions and non-profit organizations that are operating locally. Now, lots of people, when they hear designated non-financial businesses and professions, they ask, okay, what are they? What entities are included in that category? Well, it's car dealers, it's jewelers, it's legal practitioners that engaged in specific activities, for example, by facilitating the purchase of property on behalf of clients and their involvement in other types of financial transactions. And of course, we also have the realtors who buy and sell property, not the renters, but those that specifically engage in buying and selling. We supervise those for anti-money laundering purposes as well.
Okay. So Errol, we'll get back to some of the things that you would have explained, but I want you, Ken, to explain to us in terms of what would you say is the function and responsibility of the FSC as it relates to being the gatekeepers of financial services?
Okay, so the Commission, Financial Services Commission, is the sole financial services regulator, meaning that we regulate all aspects of the financial services sector in the regulatory legislation. So that means, from a practical perspective, we receive, assess, and consider applications for financial services licenses. And then once the licenses is granted, then we conduct ongoing supervision, which includes inspections, which we'll touch on a bit later. We advise the government on financial services matters. And then a major component of the commission is actually running the corporate registry, which is the unit or the division that's responsible for incorporating BVI business companies. And that is it is the largest division within the commission, and it also generates the largest portion of the revenue that the commission also generates.
Okay, so what do persons in the community need to understand about the importance of the Financial Services Commission?
What we're there for is to serve the public. We have, as a public authority, we have a responsibility to serve the public. And just recently, about 2 years ago, our mandate was extended for consumer protection from a financial services perspective. And then recently, last year, in fact, the Insurance Tribunal, which was created after the devastating storms of 2017, that mandate was extended to include all financial services legislation. Therefore, where a customer has a complaint and it cannot be resolved by the regulator, then there's a mechanism for them to make a complaint with the Financial Services Tribunal, and they will help mediate that claim to a successful resolution.
Okay, so from your perspective, what do you think that persons in the community need to understand about the FIA? Because we often think that that financial services is only international.
Right.
We never think about it locally. So what do you think are some of the things that need to think about?
Well, some of the things, obviously, that you need to think about when we're referencing the Financial Investigation Agency. A lot of what we do takes place both locally, but there's an international connection as well. For example, as mentioned before, we receive suspicious activity reports. Again, these reports, they come in from the banks. If someone locally, a customer of a bank, they use their account in any particular way, which raises suspicion by, say, a teller in the bank. That report is then sent to the internal anti-money laundering report, or the money laundering reporting officer, who would then assess that information that a teller provides, and then that money laundering reporting officer would determine whether a report needs to be filed with the Financial Investigation Agency, a suspicious activity report. So we would get that report, we would analyze it, we would conduct investigations, and at the end of that process, if we feel that this is something that should be referred to the Police Financial Crimes Unit for further investigation, with the possibility that there could be a prosecution for money laundering or related offense, then that is how we operate partially on a local level. Now, on an international level, obviously we have quite a number of British Virgin Islands business companies registered here, and from time to time, we do receive reports that these companies are being misused. Additionally, we do get, say, requests from many of our counterparts overseas who, based on their own domestic legislation, they would receive a suspicious activity report, and there's a connection to the BVI through one of the BVI registered business companies. And they would approach us and say, but look, we have this information, we have this intelligence. Can you confirm, for example, who are the directors of this particular company? Who is the beneficial owner of this particular company? And through the various networks that we are part of, including what an international organization called the Egmont Group of Financial Intelligence Units, then we are able to share that information with our counterparts in that particular group of financial intelligence unit. But just to expound further in terms of the other part of our remit, which is the supervisory aspect, like the FSC, we are required to monitor these entities. We are required to conduct on-site inspections, to review their records, to make sure that they have the necessary measures in place based on domestic legislation, again, to prevent them being used to facilitate any type of financial crime that would bring, potential reputational damage or create a reputational risk of the territory.
Okay, I think that I heard you speak about the non-profit organizations. And I think that they too have to report any fundings that they would have gotten. Explain why this is necessary, because it's the nonprofit organizations as well as churches. And why is that important?
It's important. Obviously, it is an international requirement, to monitor nonprofit organizations. And I think for us, obviously, this is done on a risk-based, taking a risk-based approach. And there is a difference between those nonprofit organizations that are purely local in the sense that whatever they do, takes place within the territory. Of course, there are other organizations that are connected to organizations, similar organizations overseas, which for us that obviously creates potential risk. And just to give you an example, you might have a church here in the BVI. The decision is made to, say, establish a school in, say, Africa, any part of the world. Now the question is whether they can be certain that any monies that, say, they send from the BVI to establish or support that school in that particular jurisdiction is actually being used for the purposes for which it's intended? Or is it possible that it could fall into the wrong hands, for example, and used to finance acts of terrorism? So we pay particular attention, to nonprofit organizations that have connections overseas. But again, it's purely based on a using a risk-based approach. So you'll find that the approach we take with nonprofit organizations, sort of a soft approach, with the exception of, again, those nonprofit organizations that have connections overseas, where we feel, okay, the level of risk might be a little higher as opposed to those organizations that purely operates within the territory.
Okay. So would the nonprofit organizations or churches have to engage with you as well at any point in time?
The nonprofit organization only if it's incorporate company, then it will be incorporated at the company's registry. However, we do not incorporate non-resident, non-profit organizations. Therefore, any NPO incorporated in the BVI has to demonstrate that its primary activities will be conducted within the BVI.
Explain what you mean when you say non-resident, just so that persons can be clear.
Essentially meaning that if an NPO from the United States doing business in the United States wants to incorporate in the BVI, they will not be permitted to do that unless they can demonstrate there's a nexus to the BVI, meaning that a majority of their operations will be conducted from within the BVI.
Okay. Errol, in terms of the activities, the suspicious activities, because you spoke about that earlier, and in terms of those transaction reports that are filed annually, how much would you say you get on an annual basis?
On an annual basis, well, I can give you an average because it fluctuates.
Okay.
For example, I think this year we're a little over 300 of these reports. Obviously, there was a significant increase over the last couple of years. And these reports, the additional reports, which caused the increase, were specifically related to cryptocurrency business, which is quite new for the British Virgin Islands. So I think we did see a spike, I think going back to like 2018, somewhere thereabouts. But out of those reports that we received so far this year, we had about 171 local, what we refer to as domestic suspicious activity reports, compared to about, say, 191 who are directly related to activities taking place outside the BVI, and these were connected to BVI business companies.
Okay, so just so that I'm clear, because I'm too learning a lot of this. Ken, would you and FSC and FIA, would you work together when these activities come in, when these reports come in, or is it just solely the FIA?
No, we do work together. For example, if we receive a substantial number of reports from a particular trust and company service providers, trust and company service provider, and in reviewing those reports, conducting analysis of those reports, we see a pattern in the sense that, okay, they reported that the reason for reporting is that they cannot establish who the beneficial owner of the companies are. They've tried, but for some reason they've just lost contact with the client. For us, it can raise a red flag, because the question we would ask, okay, how many of your companies, how many of those files, how many in terms of the size of, depends on the size of your portfolio. If you have 50,000 companies and we get a substantial number of reports for the same reason, then we would ask, okay, are your internal controls, are your policies and procedures working the way they intend to in terms of establishing, conducting your KYC CDD? And we would in turn, yes, they know your customers, customer due diligence.
Yes.
Then what we would do, we would reach out to FSC. We would say, well, okay, look, there seems to be a problem here. Perhaps during your next round of inspections, you could pay close attention to this particular issue.
Okay. I know we love the acronyms, but just for those listening, I just want us to pivot to the BOSS system. I know that in June 2017, I believe we would have done an exchange of notes where the BVI would have had to comply in some instances, and there was an agreement between BVI and the United Kingdom, and we came up with the BOSS system. You can probably talk to us about how beneficial is this BOSS system, and you can probably tell us what BOSS means.
Well, that's really a question for Errol to answer. But in order for BOSS to work, it needs information.
Yes.
Okay. And so around 2018, the Commission, there was an amendment to the legislation requiring that the beneficial owner of all BVI business companies, that certain basic information must be in the BVI. And so once that happened, it made information available to be uploaded into BOSS. Okay, so that 2018 amendment to the AML legislation, anti-money laundering legislation, created a foundation to collect all of the information to upload to BOSS, and Errol will be able to speak to you about what BOSS does and how it's used.
But is there any affiliation between the Financial Services Commission and the use of the BOSS system?
Not
Or is it just the FIA?
The FIA is the custodian of BOSS,
Yes.
so to speak. What the commission did was put the mechanisms in place so that information is available to upload to BOSS.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that, because that's a question that a number of persons in the public is always asking, because they're thinking that the FSC is the one who controls the BOSS and would input that information, not taking into consideration that it is the responsibility of the FIA. So you can perhaps, this is an opportunity for you just to, provide some more enlightenment in terms of what the BOSS system is, how it works, and how it makes your work effective.
So, as Ken mentioned, we are the primary users of the BOSS system since it was established in 2017. Now, obviously, the BOSS system is used primarily to facilitate law enforcement to law enforcement requests for information, primarily requests coming from the UK law enforcement agencies. After all, it was based on an agreement between the UK government and the government of the British Virgin Islands to establish BOSS system, again, for the reason of storing information, beneficial ownership information on BVI registered companies. So from time to time, we do get requests from UK law enforcement agencies, again, seeking information on the named beneficial owners of BVI companies that would come to their attention during the course of their investigations or analysis of suspicious activity reports. So when we get those reports, then we are required to actually search the BOSS system. Once we conduct the search and we get the name of the beneficial owner of the particular entity, that's the subject of the request, then we would send that information back to the UK law enforcement agencies that requested the information.
Okay, I just want to create a link here. I want to incorporate a business. I first come to who?
Okay, so you want to incorporate a company. So what you'll do, you'll engage a registered agent, and there are about 90 of them, in the BVI.
And it must be a registered agent.
Yes, only a registered agent can incorporate a BVI company.
Okay, and you took the mic, so I'm coming to you first, right?
Yes.
We're trying to create a picture here so that persons can understand how the industry works clearly, right?
Yes.
So we start with you, because I want to incorporate a company, and I seek a registered agent. And these individuals, you would have a list of their names?
Yes, there are lists of registered agents on the Commission's website because they are licensed and supervised by the Commission. So you'll approach one of them, and they will go through a process with you of identifying you and collecting information on you to establish who you are, your risk profile, and then they will incorporate the company.
Okay, so the due diligence is done by whom?
The registered agent.
The registered agent. Okay, and where is FSC in that process? Are you in that process as yet?
Yes, if Commission's in the process at the end.
At the end.
Okay. Well, it's
Okay,
at
so
two
take us
places.
through.
It's two places. One is a licensing process where we license the registered agent to make sure we use the word fit and proper, that they're suitable to conduct business in the BVI.
Okay.
Then they have the obligation to perform the customer due diligence on the customers, on clients, and to maintain that information. Okay. Usually, sometime after they have been licensed, the Commission will come by and conduct an inspection to make sure that they are conducting business in accordance to the expectation. Now, Errol gave an example earlier where if they see a pattern of suspicious transactions coming in, they may refer that to the Commission. When we get that information, we will then update our risk profile of that registered agent to determine whether or not we should conduct a thematic inspection. That is, we look at a theme across a number of licensees, conduct a focused inspection, or the subject, or conduct a general inspection. And then, depending on the outcome of that inspection, their risk profile will be updated.
Okay.
If they are found to be compliant with the requirements, then they will be scheduled for another inspection based on their profile, anywhere between 3 or 5 years, or depending on their risk. If they're not in compliance with what the requirements are, then they may be subject to enforcement action. And there's a whole menu, so to speak, of action that can be taken, including penalties, warning letters, a directive requiring them to do certain activity, right up to the revocation or cancellation of that license. Now, an important function of the gatekeeper is letting the right people in the gate in the first place. And that's one of our primary responsibilities. So if at the outset you're not fit to become a license holder, then you won't be granted the license. Because it is easier to say no at the outset than to withdraw an application, 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years down the line.
Okay, so we're taking a walk now through the story. So 2 to 3 years has passed, and let's say something happens. Is this where the FIA comes in? If something happens with that company, because sometimes we become listed for different reasons, or something may have happened with the company. So we just need to make sure that we understand it clearly. So from being incorporated, where does the FIA come in?
Well, the FIA really comes in if at any point in time that company comes to our attention, again, through a suspicious activity report, which alleges that, for example, the company is being used to facilitate money laundering or any type of financial crime. So that is when we actually come in and we would conduct whatever analysis, whatever investigation based on the suspicious activity report.
Okay, so we've started from the beginning, and now we're to the end. It is said that 60 cents in every dollar from financial services go towards the government, and it helps with a number of projects, whether it is education, health, roads, you name it. What is the threat to us when the financial services industry is under threat? Because you know the things that are being said all the time internationally. What does that mean for our economy?
Well, I'll let Ken take the lead on that. Answer that question.
Alan, the threat really is a reputational risk. And I give you an analogy. If you're shopping for a car and you realize the car that you want to buy has had 5 or 6 recalls on it that's stressing the safety of you wouldn't buy that car. And that's similar to in financial services. Customers want to do business with jurisdictions that obey the law. When I say the law, meaning that there are international standards that determine how certain business should be done. The banking and insurance business particularly have been regulated for hundreds of years. Okay, so the purpose of regulation is to give a level of comfort to customers that the persons you're doing business with are subject to regulation, are doing the right thing. And so that's the international assessors, what they come in to do is they come in and check. It's like taking an exam, come to check to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do, or what you say what you're doing. If you're not doing it, then you can then be subject to blacklisting because you're not complying by the international rules. Now, the rules change on a regular basis. Sometimes we participate in those rule change, and other times the rule change without our participation. That's the part we don't like. We prefer when the rules are being changed, we're part of that process.
Okay.
So that we can help shape the outcome of the rule, not to make it to our liking, but to make sure that the rules are fair to all parties.
Okay. So when you say that, a reputable jurisdiction, you have all the laws. What are the characteristics you would say? What are the characteristics of a jurisdiction with a good reputation?
The most important one would be regulation to an acceptable standard and the application of the international standards. Okay, as I said, the banking business, insurance business, those have been regulated for hundreds of years. There are international standards as to how banks should operate, how insurance companies should operate. So a good characteristic is that jurisdictions apply the international standard in a way that's appropriate to them, but meeting the standards. You don't have to apply it verbatim, word for word. You can change the word around, but the essence of it is that you should apply the international standards so that when you are assessed, you can get a good outcome from that assessment.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that financial services is not just about a trust company, nor is it about just a financial services company. It is just so much more. You wanted to add to that?
Yes, it is so much more, because obviously all of these various entities, these regulated, non-regulated entities, they're all subject to international standards, and it's those international standards that they are the benchmark by which the territory will be assessed or judged, and next year the territory will undergo a mutual evaluation, and it will be looking at exactly how the standards are applied in the British Virgin Islands. It would assess all of those that play a key role: the FSC, the FIA, the Police Financial Crimes Unit, Customs. All of these entities will be assessed to see how effective they are in carrying out their mandates. And at the end of the day, I think all of these things would actually determine the outcome in terms of whether or not the BVI is viewed favorably or whether it is reviewed and determined to be not so favorable in terms of how the financial services sector is operating.
Okay, so why is it important for us to make sure that we keep our BVI financial services on par?
Well, obviously, as Mr. Baker said, there's the reputational risk. I mean, clearly we don't want to be blacklisted.
What does blacklisted mean?
Well, blacklisted mean basically that it can have a number of connotations. It can be that, okay, you're a black sheep where no one wants to come to the BVI because the regulations are weak. The regulatory framework is considered weak and not up to par regarding international standards. I don't know if Mr. Baker would like to add anything.
And while adding, Mr. Baker, I know we always say that financial services in the BVI, it's a well-regulated jurisdiction, so perhaps you can expound on that as well, because I think it would also bring clarity.
Well, well-regulated means that you're complying with the international, essentially means you're complying with the international standards. Now, most persons in the general population don't realize that there are international standards that are applicable to us. I mean, even in my former career as a banker, I didn't know they had international standards for bank supervision. We know that the bank had manuals, and we try to follow what the bank manuals are. And even the bank, the inspectors came in and reviewed that. But afterwards, in joining the commission, you realize that there are higher levels of regulations. Okay, and so the domestic legislation is usually geared, drafted in such a way to comply with the international standards. Because the international standards, that's what they use as I was as a benchmark to determine whether or not you're complying with them. It's important because if you aren't complying with them, then you are assessed as non-compliant, uncooperative, or you have a weak regulatory regime. And as I said earlier, most customers, particularly international customers, they want to do business with a jurisdiction or with companies who are subject to regulations that they know they're confident that if something goes wrong, there's a mechanism to help them resolve, the dispute or the wrongdoing.
Okay, I want to pause at this time to see if there's anyone in the audience who may have a question for either of our very, very capable guests who have been speaking to us very eloquently about the financial services as they are the gatekeepers. Are there any questions? Okay, I think, you do? Okay.
Okay.
That's basically quite a big problem because there's not sufficient legislation to control the trade in cryptocurrency.
Okay, so Alan, for the benefit of the listening audience, the question really, what is the future for regulation of cryptocurrencies?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the Commission has done quite a bit of work in that area, and we have a draft piece of legislation called the Virtual Asset Service Providers Act. It is currently going through consultation with a sector of the industry, the fund security sector, and the hope is that the work on that legislation, that bill, will be finalized by the end of this year, with a view of having go through the legislative process during the first quarter of next year. So I'm anticipating that by the middle of next year, we will have a regulatory regime in place for the licensing, well, not the license, for the supervision, because it most likely have a registration process instead of a licensing process. Because if the activity needs to be licensed, then there's existing legislation, the Security and Investment Business Act, which will deal with that. But there'll be a registration and regulatory regime in place for cryptocurrencies.
Okay, so do you think that there may be an opportunity for some training for persons who may want to get into the cryptocurrency? Because, we hear it, persons are trying. However, I think if there's an opportunity to provide more information, more training on it, then it would give persons a clear understanding of how they should function and operate around, this new type of currency.
Well, there's a lot of training currently ongoing, and I believe there was one just probably last week as well. And if you do an internet search, you'll find that there are lots of jurisdictions that are putting on training around cryptocurrency. But if you read the media, you realize that jurisdictions are taking different approaches to it. Some jurisdictions are going down the road that the BVI is going down in terms of putting a regulatory regime around it. Other jurisdictions are saying, no, this is a very high risk, high volatile industry, and some are banning it, meaning they will not allow it in their jurisdiction. But it's up to the individual jurisdiction how they tend to approach it. In the BVI context, there's a number of existing BVI companies that deal with cryptocurrencies. So it's important that we put a regime in place to appropriately, safeguard the persons who are using those existing companies.
Okay, Errol, you wanted to add anything to that? It seems so.
Yes, just to stress, I think it's very important for the BVI as a financial services jurisdiction to have mechanisms in place to supervise, if not full-on regulation of this particular activity, because from the FIA's perspective, we see it as very important. Again, because I alluded to earlier the fact that we have been receiving suspicious activity reports in relation to cryptocurrency business, where some persons engaging in the activity online, unfortunately, they are engaging in it to facilitate criminal activity, particularly activity that's taking place in that space of the web we refer to as the dark web, where they use cryptocurrency to purchase illegal firearms. They use it to purchase drugs, and I'll give you an example. Something that you probably find it difficult to believe. We're in the process now of acquiring investigative tools to be able to track these online activity or trading activities taking place on what we refer to as the blockchain, where the space in which these activities, actually the trading activity, take place. And we were able to isolate in testing, during our testing phase for one of these investigative tools, we were able to pinpoint where one user was actually connected, or a trader was actually connected to a site on the dark web where persons could actually witness live murders taking place, which is bone chilling. I mean, when you think about it, but I just say that to say that, look, these are the type of activities that's actually taking place on the dark web, that's connected to cryptocurrency. Very small number of trading activities taking place on the dark web, but it's not the numbers that count. It's the type of activities that's connected. So I think, just to impress, of the importance of having some form of regulatory or supervisory regime in place.
Okay, well, it's very good to know that you are equipping yourselves to make sure that you can mitigate a number of these activities, so that we continue to keep the Virgin Islands, and our financial services brand safe. But as we start to wind down, I just want for us to, okay, we have another question. Okay, because for a moment it was silent. The question is, has the BVI ever been blacklisted?
Not any of the major assessments that have been conducted. So we have historically have a good track record of complying to a satisfactory level of, but we were blacklisted, I think, recently with respect to France on a different area. But historically, we've had we have stayed off, I think, 99% of the blacklisting lists that have been going around.
Okay, so how it works is that if you're blacklisted, the persons, the companies in that area would not be able to do business with you, right? Correct?
It could be restrictions,
It could be
or
restrictions.
it could
Prohibited.
mean that they have to do enhanced due diligence.
Okay.
They have to do additional measures to do business with BVI business companies.
Okay, so we do have another question from the audience.
I have a question in relation to the nonprofit organizations. You mentioned that there's typically some oversight, particularly there's enhanced oversight where there's an international component to the nonprofit organization. And I was wondering whether there's any desire, or indeed a mechanism, by which you supervise foreign nonprofits who come into the BVI to provide, some sort of support. For example, after Irma, there were a number of groups who came in and provided relief efforts. Is there a mechanism in place by which the FIA or yourselves would ensure that those entities are properly regulated and that we're not accepting the proceeds of crime?
Well, remember I said that international NPOs are not normally allowed to incorporate in the BVI. But there are some exceptions to that, because there are a number of international NPOs that also are registered here, but because they can demonstrate that they will be operating in the BVI, they are permitted. But if the nonprofit organization is only going to be registered in the BVI and all of the activities are going to be conducted outside of the BVI, then that will not be permitted, because then you don't have the mechanism in place to monitor what they are doing and to detect illegal or money laundering activities. Okay, so the key point is that if the international MPO will conduct part of its business in the BVI, then it will be permitted, and then they'll be subject to the review or the supervision of the FIA. If none of the activities are going to be in BVI, then they will not be permitted because it creates additional risks which we will not be in a position to manage.
Okay, are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, we have one last question.
Requirement for the publicly accessible register comes into place. I think that's something important we want to have with it.
Okay. So the Errol have touched on this earlier. The UK has been asking its overseas territories, as the UK have done, to establish a publicly accessible register of beneficial owners. Now, the BVI has such a register through BAS. So the next step of that would be implementing a mechanism for that information to be publicly accessible, because as I rightly said, it is only accessible to the UK law enforcement agencies. Now, publicly accessible register of beneficial ownership is not an international standard. It's a requirement under the 5th AML, EU AML legislation, but it's not an international standard. So we are moving towards, there are a number of countries that are moving towards establishing them. So the BVI has an obligation through an agreement with the UK to, make its register of beneficial owners publicly accessible. And so there is some work that needs to be done in order to achieve that. But that process has been driven by the government, because they're the ones who entered into the agreement with the UK, to have that in place.
Okay, you wanted to add something, or you're good? Okay. Okay, so we have. I see Elise is standing, because Elise has a question, and I cannot not look at the director, right?
The question wanted to go back to, blockchain and cryptocurrency, because one of the things we often hear is that blockchain is one of the most transparent, because anybody can access the blockchain and to see the transaction that is taking place. Yet we hear Mr. George talking about how, it facilitates, the dark web and exchanges and so forth. So how do you explain to the public how blockchain is transparent, but yet still these facilitation of dark web activities can still take place?
Yes, it is. There's a high degree of transparency, because the various tools that I would have mentioned, for example, the banks, big international banks, they use these tools, to screen activities taking place on the blockchain relative to virtual currency trading. But still, the sophistication that's involved in this activity, and particularly from the point of view of those persons who are using the blockchain to engage in criminal activity, there are those elements. They have many ways of sort of masking their identity, and there are various tools that they can use to do so. And I think this is the type of activity, I think, that's concerning from the FIA's perspective, and more broadly speaking from law enforcement perspective, because example, even the tools can only go so far. The tools might be able to tell you, might be able to identify a wallet. It might be able to identify the owner of the wallet. It might be able to identify a particular IP address, connected to the user, the person engaging in the online trading activity. But what it may not be able to do is tell you, well, okay, this person, it might tell you, well, okay, this person is in Russia, but it wouldn't tell you exactly where in Russia this person is located. It might say, and let me explain that further. It might tell you that, okay, the user is in Moscow, but it wouldn't tell you, well, it's in building A, B, or C in Moscow. Yeah, so it's very difficult to to track the activity where persons are using these tools to actually mask their identity, their location, from which they're actually engaging in the trading activity.
Okay, so we're actually winding down. So it's a very good topic to end on, as we transition into what does the regulatory landscape look like for the Virgin Islands in the future? Any of you can take it, or both of you can take it, because you're already talking about the things that could actually happen in the future. So what do you foresee it would look like years from now?
Well, anticipate the regulatory landscape will change. It will continue to evolve. The international standards will continue to evolve as new threats emerge. The international standards will be adjusted to address those threats, and therefore the domestic legislation will need to be adjusted as accordingly. As we are assessed, and if we identify weaknesses, then the regulatory landscape will have to change to ensure that those weaknesses are addressed. And as new technology emerge and new threats to the financial system emerge, then the regulatory landscape will have to adjust accordingly to be able to manage the risks that are created.
Okay.
And just to go back to something I mentioned earlier regarding cryptocurrency, I remember it was in the very early to mid 2000 when I first heard about these cryptocurrencies, virtual assets, new payment methods, not knowing that years later we would be hearing about these activities actually taking place. And there is some thought that cryptocurrency is the future, meaning it will actually replace the fiat currency that is now actually being used, the hard currency. So clearly, because this activity takes place online, it will definitely create some challenges. It would continue to create some challenges for law enforcement agencies. But as Mr. Baker said, then obviously we'll have to adapt, because as these things happen, the international standards will continue to evolve, and we will just need to adapt.
Okay, well, I'm confident that you will adopt, because you are the gatekeepers, aren't you? Okay, so any wrap up? We want to wrap up now. So if there are any parting words, let's start with you, since you have the mic, Errol. Any parting words that you have for the audience at this time?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to thank the organizers. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I mean, it's not every day that we actually get this opportunity to participate in this type of forum, so I'm grateful to that. And just to those persons seated here, as well as the wider viewing public, I think it's important to be able to look at the financial services sector, look at the role the financial services sector plays, as well as especially persons employed within the sector, to do what is necessary for them to do their part to help protect this very important sector to the BVI's economy.
Okay. Mr. Baker?
Yes, thanks. I mean, I'd like to echo the sentiments that Errol expressed. For the wider audience, the banks and trust companies and insurance companies, the financial services entities, conducting customer due diligence, know your customer, is very important. Sometimes, they may go a bit further than necessary, but it's a necessary part of the regime for them to be able to identify who their customers are, know who their customers are, monitor their customers' transactions, and then take action when they need to. It's a requirement from the international standards. It's a requirement from the domestic legislation, and so when you go into the bank and they ask you A, B, and C to produce it. It's not that they're being difficult, but they're trying to comply with what's required under the legislation.
Okay, well, it's good to know that because I've been in some situations where they have asked for additional information or to find out if you're a politically exposed person. So it's good to hear that, well, you're the reason why the question is being asked, to make sure that I do my part to make sure that financial services remain, one of the strongest pillars within our economy. I do trust that the heads of the BVI regulatory arms, Mr. Errol George, who's the director of the Financial Investigation Agency, and Mr. Kenneth Baker, who is the CEO and managing director of the Financial Services Commission, have both been able to enlighten all of us about the BVI financial services industry and its contribution to the BVI economy through the lens of the regulators. Our objective today was just to provide you with an opportunity to learn more about the financial services industry, the contribution it makes to our economy, and the professionals who really continue to make our jurisdiction a global leader in financial services. I'm pleased to have been the moderator, Arlene T. Penn, for this special edition of the Breakfast Forum titled The Gatekeepers of Financial Services. I thank you for joining us and do have a pleasant day.